She painted the Duke's portrait in the gallery, never knowing. He came each night just to see her work. The Aurora Gallery stood silent and imposing, its vaulted ceilings gathering shadows like memories. Marianne Solvin paused at the threshold, a worn leather case clutched against her chest. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting elongated patterns across the marble floor, where no footsteps echoed but her own. "Miss Solvin," announced Madame Thane, the gallery's keeper, a woman of severe countenance and military posture. "You are expected. The preparations have been made as His Grace requested." Marianne nodded, following the older woman's rigid back through the cavernous space. Each step resounded with frightful clarity, as if the gallery itself were announcing her modest presence to the ancestral portraits that lined the walls, stern faces watching her passage with painted judgment. "His Grace has peculiar requirements," Madame Thane continued, her voice like dry parchment. "The Duke of Valeborn does not pose. He does not sit. He does not engage." She turned abruptly. "You are to complete his portrait, using only the miniature provided, and whatever glimpses of His Grace you might secure during his rare appearances." "I understand," Marianne replied, though she did not. How could one capture a soul never seen? The easel waited in the eastern wing, positioned beside a window where light would fall most generously. Beside it stood a small table with a silver tray bearing a miniature, a formal, emotionless rendering of a man's face, so devoid of spirit it might have been a death mask. "This is all I have to work from?" Marianne asked, unable to mask her dismay. "His Grace values his privacy above all else," Madame Thane replied. "Some say the late Duchess's passing left him diminished." She lowered her voice. "Others whisper of a man who cannot bear to see himself reflected in the world." When Marianne was left alone, she arranged her supplies with practiced hands. Linseed oil, brushes of sable and hog bristle, pigments in glass vials. She positioned the blank canvas and studied the miniature with growing unease. The man depicted was handsome in a severe way, with dark hair threaded with silver and eyes of such pale grey they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Well, Your Grace," she whispered to the empty room, "I cannot paint what I cannot see." That first day she sketched tentatively, creating the frame of his face and the suggestion of shoulders. As dusk gathered, Madame Thane returned with a lamp. "You will ruin your eyes," she warned. "The gallery closes at nightfall." Alone in her modest quarters that evening, Marianne could not dispel the unsettling sensation that her work had been observed, not by the painted ancestors, but by living eyes. She dismissed the fancy. After all, what duke would care to watch an artist's humble labor? As she slept, Soren Valeborn, 8th Duke of Valeborn, slipped into the gallery like a shadow returning to its source. The lamp still burned low near the easel, casting uncertain light upon her day's work. He approached with silent footsteps, removing a glove to trace the air just above the canvas, not quite touching. "So, this is how you see me," he murmured. "Or rather, how you see the mask I present." His fingers hovered over the stern mouth she had sketched. "Even from so little, you've found more truth than most." Before departing, he adjusted the position of her brushes, aligning them with precision. On the small table beside her palette, he placed a single amber rose, its petals still closed against the night. When Marianne returned the next morning, she found her workspace altered, brushes too neatly arranged, the lamp moved slightly. And there, impossible and silent in accusation, lay a rose where none had been. "Did someone enter the gallery last night?" she asked Madame Thane. The older woman's face revealed nothing. "The gallery belongs to His Grace. He may come and go as he pleases." Marianne's heart quickened at the implication. "The Duke was here?" "I am neither his keeper nor his confessor," came the cryptic reply. "I suggest you attend to your commission, Miss Solvin. The Duke is not known for his patience." That day, Marianne painted with renewed purpose, speaking occasionally to the canvas as if it might answer. "Your eyes hide too much, Your Grace. What sorrow keeps them so guarded?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but not unheard. For 3 days, Marianne worked in solitude, yet each morning brought evidence of nocturnal visitation, a brush cleaned when she had left it stained, the curtain drawn differently, and always the amber rose replaced with a fresh bloom. She began to leave questions in her wake, written on scraps of paper tucked beside her palette. "What color truly suits your temperament, Your Grace? This austere black seems a costume rather than a choice." She arrived the next day to find her note gone, replaced by a single word in elegant script, "Azure." Her brush faltered above the canvas. She mixed a deep blue, the color of twilight seas, and with tentative strokes suggested it in the background of his portrait. Not as clothing, but as essence, a halo of hidden character. The work began to transform, gaining depth where before it had only form. "You are taking liberties with your commission," observed Madame Thane, appearing silently at her shoulder. Marianne straightened her spine. "I am painting what I see." "And what, pray tell, do you see?" "You have scarcely glimpsed his grace." "Sometimes," Marianne replied, cleaning her brush with deliberate care, "one can see more clearly through whispers and shadows than in full light." That evening, determined to solve the mystery, Marianne concealed herself within an alcove near the gallery, after Madame Thane believed her departed. Hours passed in silent vigilance, her limbs growing stiff from immobility. She had nearly surrendered to fatigue when the sound of a door opening sent awareness coursing through her veins. A tall figure entered, moving with the confidence of ownership. He approached the easel, his bearing unmistakably noble despite the absence of livery or attendants. In profile, illuminated by moonlight, he was the very image she had begun to paint. Proud features, softened by an expression of vulnerability he likely permitted no one to witness. The Duke of Valeborn stood before her work, examining it with such intense scrutiny that Marianne felt the weight of his gaze as if it were upon her own person. "You see too much," he murmured to the canvas, "and yet not enough." He placed a fresh amber rose beside her palette, then did something that caused Marianne's breath to catch. He touched the canvas, his fingertips resting briefly on the area where she had incorporated the azure hue. "How did you know?" he asked the silent portrait. Marianne shifted slightly, her skirts rustling against stone. The Duke turned sharply, his hand moving to where a weapon might be concealed. "Who intrudes?" His voice carried the cold authority of one accustomed to immediate obedience. She stepped forward, moonlight revealing her presence. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I am Marianne Solvine." Recognition transformed his features. The artist. "Yes, Your Grace." Silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken accusations and questions. "You have been watching me work," she finally said, the statement somewhere between question and indictment. "It is my gallery," he replied, though the defense sounded hollow even to his own ears. "And my privacy," Marianne challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. A shadow of something, perhaps respect, crossed his face. "You speak your mind, Miss Solvine, a rare quality in these halls. Forgive me if I have overstepped. There is nothing to forgive where there is no false pretense." He gestured to the portrait. "You have captured something I did not intend to reveal." Marianne moved closer to the canvas. "What have I revealed that troubles you so?" "Solitude," he answered, the word falling between them like a confession. "Not the dignified isolation of rank, but the hollow echo of an empty life." "Then I have failed," she said softly, "for I meant to capture strength tempered by sorrow, not defeat." His eyes, so pale they seemed almost translucent in the moonlight, studied her with new intensity. "You are unusual, Miss Solvine. Most would not dare speak thus to a duke. Perhaps that is why your portrait remains unfinished by so many before me. They painted the title, not the man. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, propriety warring with honesty, station with genuine connection. "It grows late," he said finally, retreating behind formality. "You should not be here at this hour." "Nor should you be observing my work in secret," she countered. "If you wish to see your portrait's progress, I would welcome your presence in daylight." A smile ghosted across his lips, so brief she might have imagined it. "Tomorrow, then. Though I make no promises to be an accommodating subject. I ask only for truth, Your Grace. The canvas will reveal the rest." The following morning, Marianne arrived earlier than usual, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged her materials. The amber rose from the previous night remained, its petals now fully opened in surrender to the light. She touched one silken petal, marveling at its persistence, like certain emotions that refuse to wither despite all logic. "It is called eternal ember," came a voice from behind her, "a rare variety that blooms even in winter." She turned to find the Duke standing in the doorway, formal in appearance, yet somehow altered from the stern figure in the miniature. In daylight, the silver threads in his dark hair caught the sun, and his eyes, those pale, guarded eyes, regarded her with cautious interest. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying deeply, "I did not expect you so early." "Evidently not," he replied, glancing at her paint-stained apron and the loose tendrils of hair that had escaped her hasty arrangement. "I find I am curious about your method, Miss Solvine. Few artists speak to their subjects as you spoke to my portrait last night. Heat rose to Marianne's cheeks. You heard everything, he confirmed, moving into the room with measured steps. You asked why I hide, an impertinent question, yet one that begs answering if the portrait is to have any truth, she replied, recovering her composure. Soren Veilborn circled the easel, examining her work with the critical eye of a collector. You have made me appear almost human. Is that not what you are, beneath the title? His laugh was short and without humor. Some would debate that assertion. The peerage often values bloodline over heart. Marianne selected a brush, seeking refuge in the familiar ritual of preparation. Will you sit for me today, Your Grace? Or shall I continue with just the miniature and impressions? Impressions, he repeated, the word carrying a weight she could not decipher. What impressions have you formed of me, Miss Solvine? I find myself curious. She met his gaze directly, her artist's eye cataloguing the fine lines etched around his mouth, the slight furrow between his brows, marks of character rather than flaws. I see a man who observes more than he reveals, who finds more comfort in shadows than light, who leaves roses as messages he cannot speak. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You presume much. I paint what I see, she replied simply. Will you sit? After a moment's consideration, he inclined his head in assent and took the chair positioned near the window. Sunlight caught the angles of his face, illuminating what the miniature had failed to capture, a certain vulnerability beneath the aristocratic features, a humanity the formal portrait had deliberately obscured. Marianne worked in silence, stealing glances at him as her brush moved across canvas. His posture remained rigid, uncomfortable with direct observation. "How you needn't maintain such formality," she said gently. "The portrait will reveal more truth if you simply exist as yourself." "And who might that be?" he asked, an edge of bitterness in his tone. "The Duke of Veilborn exists for duty, not authenticity." "Then perhaps this is not a ducal portrait, but simply that of a man named Soren." His head turned sharply at her use of his given name. "You take liberties, Miss Solvine." "Art requires liberty, Your Grace. Otherwise we merely replicate what is already known." Their conversation lapsed into silence, but something had shifted, a barrier lowered, if only slightly. As the morning progressed, his posture eased, and occasionally, when she lost herself in her work, Marianne looked up to find him watching her with an expression that stirred unfamiliar warmth in her chest. By midday, Madame Thane appeared with refreshments, her eyebrows rising nearly to her hairline, at the sight of the Duke actually present. "Your Grace," she managed, setting down the tray with careful precision, "we are honored by your presence. Miss Solvine has persuaded me that a portrait benefits from the subject's participation," he replied, his tone neutral, though his eyes held a glint of amusement. When they were alone again, Marianne offered him tea, the domesticity of the gesture standing in stark contrast to their respective stations. "Your hands are stained," he observed, as she passed him the cup. She glanced down at her fingers, marked with smudges of paint. "The hazards of my profession, they never truly come clean." "I find it refreshing," he said, the admission seeming to surprise even him. "Most women of my acquaintance would sooner die than appear with so much as a wrinkle in their gloves. Then they value appearance over creation," Marianne replied, "a poor exchange in my estimation." The days that followed established a pattern both unexpected and increasingly anticipated. Each morning the Duke would arrive as Marianne set up her materials, sometimes bearing a fresh amber rose, though he never acknowledged the gesture directly. They would talk, cautiously at first, then with growing ease, as she worked on his portrait. The canvas evolved, capturing not merely his likeness, but something more elusive, the man emerging from behind the ducal facade. On the fourth such morning, their conversation turned to art itself. "Tell me, Miss Solvine," he began, watching her mix pigments with practiced precision, "how did one of your circumstances come to master such a demanding profession?" The question might have offended, had his tone carried condescension, but Marianne detected only genuine curiosity. "My father was a restoration artist at the Royal Academy," she replied, adding a touch of burnt sienna to her palette. "When consumption took my mother, he brought me to his workshop rather than leave me with strangers. I learned by watching, then by doing." "And now you paint the nobility," he observed. "Does it not strike you as ironic?" She met his gaze, her brush pausing mid-stroke. "What irony do you perceive, Your Grace?" "That those born to privilege must commission those who truly understand life to capture our existence. We purchase the reflection we cannot ourselves see." Marianne considered this, tilting her head slightly. Perhaps that is why portraiture endures. It is not merely vanity, but a search for understanding, to be seen as we cannot see ourselves. And what do you see when you look at me? The question emerged quietly, almost as if he had not intended to voice it aloud. She studied him, not as a subject but as a man, taking in the controlled posture that spoke of burden rather than arrogance, the eyes that revealed fleeting warmth before retreating to wary reserve. "I see someone who has forgotten how to be seen," she answered finally, "who exists in the space between obligation and solitude." His expression remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the arm of his chair. "You presume to know me after mere days." "I observe, Your Grace. It is my profession." "And do all your subjects receive such scrutiny?" "Only those who visit their portraits after dark," she replied, a subtle challenge in her tone. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might almost have been termed a smile. "Touché, Miss Solvine." Their conversation might have continued in this vein, had the gallery doors not swung open to admit an unwelcome visitor. Lord Renfield Morceron entered with the confident stride of one who considered all spaces accessible to his whim, his elegantly tailored form moving with calculated grace. "Valeborn," he called, then stopped short upon seeing the tableau before him. "My word, the rumors are true, then. You've emerged from your self-imposed exile." The Duke rose, his posture reverting instantly to aristocratic rigidity. "Morceron, I don't recall extending an invitation." "Come now," Morceron replied, approaching with a smile that failed to reach his amber eyes. "Must old friends stand on such ceremony?" His gaze slid to Marianne, assessing her with undisguised interest. "So this is the artist who's accomplished what the entire season could not, drawn the reclusive Duke into society." Marianne curtsied slightly, but remained silent, acutely aware of the tension suddenly filling the gallery. "Miss Solvine is completing a commissioned work," Soren stated flatly. "Nothing more." "Indeed." Morceron circled the easel, examining the portrait with exaggerated attention. "Curious, then, that you would personally attend these sessions. The Duke, I remember, would sooner face the guillotine than sit for hours while being scrutinized. Perhaps you do not remember me as well as you believe." Morceron laughed, the sound hollow against the gallery's vaulted ceiling. "Oh, I remember perfectly, including your rather extreme reaction to Lady Ambrose's attempt at capturing your likeness 2 seasons ago. Poor woman barely recovered from the public dismissal." Marianne's hand tightened around her brush. She recalled the incident. It had been the talk of artistic circles for months. Lady Ambrose, a noblewoman of modest talent but considerable social standing, had claimed the Duke rejected her portrait with such contempt that she had retired from society temporarily. "Lady Ambrose attempted flattery, not truth," Soren replied, his voice glacial. "I have no patience for artificial sentiment, in art or in company." The pointed comment hung in the air between the men, laden with history Marianne could only guess at. "Truth," Morceron repeated, his gaze returning to Marianne. "And what truths have you discovered about our illustrious Duke, Miss Solvine? I find myself intensely curious." Before she could respond, Soren interjected, "Miss Solvine is not here for your entertainment, Morceron. State your business, or take your leave." "So protective," Morceron observed, twirling his copper-tipped cane idly. "One might almost think, but no, surely not." He smiled thinly. "I came merely to deliver your invitation to Lady Harwick's midsummer ball. Society has noticed your absence long enough, and whispers grow tedious without fresh material to sustain them." He extended an envelope of heavy cream paper, sealed with wax the color of blood. Soren accepted it without comment, his expression unreadable. "Do bring your artist," Morceron added, already moving toward the door. "The Tun would be fascinated to meet the woman who has accomplished what a duchess could not, capturing the Duke of Valeborn's attention for more than a passing moment." After he departed, silence descended, thick with unspoken questions. "You need not concern yourself with Morceron's insinuations," Soren said finally, still staring at the closed doors. "He delights in creating discomfort." "He seemed to know you well," Marianne ventured carefully. "We were schoolboys together. Now he is simply a reminder of obligations I would prefer to forget." He turned back to her, his expression once again guarded. "Perhaps we should conclude today's session. I find my concentration has been compromised." Marianne nodded, setting down her brush with reluctance. "Of course, Your Grace." As he turned to leave, he paused, his back to her. What Morceron implied about Lady Ambrose, it was not as he suggested. "You owe me no explanations." Perhaps not, he agreed, half turning to meet her gaze. But I find, unexpectedly, that I wish you to know the truth rather than the gossip. The next day, Soren did not come. Marianne worked alone, the silence of the gallery oppressive where once it had been peaceful. She found herself glancing repeatedly at the doorway, anticipation gradually yielding to disappointment. By afternoon, she had progressed little on the portrait, finding it difficult to capture nuances of expression from memory alone. His Grace sends his regrets, Madame Thane announced, appearing with the customary tea tray. Affairs of the estate require his attention today. Marianne nodded, attempting to mask her disproportionate dismay. Of course, the portrait can wait. He did, however, leave this for you. The older woman extended a sealed note, her expression inscrutable. Once alone, Marianne broke the seal, a stylized V pressed into silver wax, and unfolded the heavy paper. Miss Solvine, I regret that duties prevent our session today. However, if you are amenable, I would speak with you regarding yesterday's unfortunate interruption. The West Gardens offer privacy at sunset. SV. The invitation, for surely that was what it was, sent an inappropriate flutter through her chest. To meet privately would certainly breach the professional boundaries of their arrangement, yet Marianne found herself unable to contemplate refusal. As the day's light began its golden descent, she made her way through the gallery's western exit into gardens bordered by ancient yew hedges. The space felt contained yet expansive, with gravel paths winding between formal beds where late roses bloomed in defiant splendor. She found him beside a stone fountain where water trickled in a continuous, meditative stream. Without his formal coat, dressed simply in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, he appeared almost a different man, still aristocratic in bearing, but less constrained. You came, he said, relief evident in his tone. Your note left little room for misinterpretation, she replied, though they both recognized the falsehood in her words. She could have easily declined. He gestured to a stone bench. Please. They sat, maintaining a proper distance, though acutely aware of each other's proximity. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden, painting everything in amber light, reminiscent of the roses he left her. I believe I owe you context for yesterday's encounter, he began, his gaze fixed on the fountain's cascade. Morcerran and I share a complicated history. You were friends once, she offered when he paused. Once, he agreed, before ambition consumed whatever genuine sentiment he might have possessed. Now he collects vulnerabilities like others collect art, for display when most advantageous. And Lady Ambrose? Marianne asked, unable to contain her curiosity. A shadow crossed his features. A pawn in a game I refused to play. She approached me with an offer of portraiture shortly after my wife's passing, when I was not myself. The commission was merely pretext for an arranged courtship orchestrated by Morcerran. That seems unnecessarily elaborate. The Tun prefers its machinations cloaked in propriety. He turned to face her directly. I rejected the portrait because it represented a falsehood, a manipulated connection I had no desire to pursue. Morcerran never forgave the public rebuff. Understanding dawned. And now he sees another artist in your company. Precisely. He suspects what he always suspects, opportunity for scandal or leverage. His voice hardened. I would not have you made target of his speculation. I can manage Lord Morcerran, Marianne replied with more confidence than she felt. Few can, once he decides they are of interest. His hand moved as if to cover hers, then retreated. I would not see your reputation compromised by association with me. The implication stung more than it should have. You believe your attention damages my standing? I know it does, he answered simply. A duke's interest is rarely viewed as innocent, particularly when the subject is an unmarried woman of modest means. Then why continue our sessions? Why the notes? The roses? The questions emerged with unexpected intensity. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. Because I find myself unable to maintain proper distance, your presence has become, he struggled visibly with the admission, necessary. The word hung between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to voice. Marianne's breath caught, her artist's fingers suddenly aching to capture the raw emotion transforming his features. The portrait, she began, seeking safer ground, is no longer merely a commission to me, he finished, nor, I think, to you. Evening birds called to one another as twilight deepened around them. In the gathering dusk, social distinctions seemed to blur like colors on a rain-swept canvas. What would you have of me, Soren? She asked softly, his given name escaping before she could reconsider. He did not correct her presumption. Your continued honesty, he replied after a moment. It has become something I depend upon, and if honesty leads where propriety forbids. His expression grew somber. Then we face an impossible choice. The sound of approaching footsteps on gravel interrupted whatever might have followed. They stood quickly, resuming appropriate distance as Madame Thane appeared at the garden's entrance. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she said, her gaze moving between them with careful neutrality. "A messenger has arrived from London. He says the matter is urgent." Sorin nodded once, his ducal mask settling back into place. "Miss Solvine, I must attend to this. Perhaps we might continue our discussion tomorrow?" "Of course, Your Grace," she replied, the formality now a shared pretense. As he departed, Madame Thane remained, studying Marianne with eyes that missed nothing. "The gallery grows cold after sunset," she observed, her tone revealing more than her words. "You would be wise not to linger in spaces designed for viewing, not inhabiting." The warning, delivered without malice but with unmistakable intent, followed Marianne back to her quarters, where she lay sleepless, replaying his words. Necessary, an impossible choice. The urgent message, Marianne learned the following day, had summoned the Duke to London on matters requiring immediate attention. Madame Thane delivered this information with her usual efficiency, along with the news that his absence might extend several days. "His Grace requested that you continue your work," the housekeeper added, watching Marianne's reaction closely. "The gallery remains at your disposal." Without its subject, the portrait seemed suddenly hollow, a shell awaiting the spirit that would animate it. Nevertheless, Marianne worked diligently, refining details from memory, the precise angle of his jaw when he spoke of duty, the momentary softness around his eyes when guard lowered, the controlled strength in hands that never quite relaxed. On the third day of his absence, as afternoon light slanted golden through the gallery windows, unexpected footsteps interrupted her concentration. She looked up, hope flaring briefly before reality asserted itself. Not the Duke, but Lord Morceran approached, his elegant form silhouetted against the doorway. "Miss Solvine," he greeted, advancing with calculated grace. "How fortunate to find you alone." Marianne set down her brush, instinctively wary. "Lord Morceran, if you seek his grace, I regret to inform you he's been called to London." "Oh, I'm perfectly aware of Valeborn's whereabouts," he replied, circling her workspace with predatory interest. "Indeed, his absence provides an opportunity for candid conversation. I have work to complete," she countered, gesturing to the portrait. "Ah, yes, your masterpiece." He examined the canvas, his expression unreadable. "You've captured something elusive." Sorin as he might have been perhaps before life hardened him beyond recognition. The personal reference to the Duke surprised her. "You speak as if you know him well." "Better than most," Morceran confirmed, tracing the edge of the easel with one gloved finger. "We shared formative years, confidences, even similar affections once." He turned to her directly, amber eyes calculating beneath a pleasant facade. "Which is why I feel compelled to offer friendly counsel. Valeborn is not a man given to genuine attachment. His interest, while perhaps flattering, is invariably temporary." Marianne maintained her composure despite the implication. "You presume an impropriety that does not exist. I am merely fulfilling a commission." "Come now," Morceran chided, his smile sharpening. "Private garden meetings at sunset hardly constitute professional consultation. The servants talk, Miss Solvine." Cold dread settled in her stomach. "You mistake artistic discussion for something improper. Perhaps, or perhaps I recognize a pattern." He moved closer, lowering his voice confidentially. "You are not the first to believe yourself exceptional in Sorin's estimation. The late Duchess harbored similar illusions before discovering his true nature. Despite herself, Marianne felt curiosity stir. The Duke's marriage remained a subject wrapped in mystery, mentioned only in hushed tones among the staff. "What do you mean?" Sensing advantage, Morceran pressed on. "Elaine came to her marriage with romantic notions quickly dispelled. Sorin is constitutionally incapable of the vulnerability love requires." She withered in the shadow of his remoteness, eventually seeking comfort elsewhere. "You speak ill of the dead," Marianne objected, though uncertainty crept through her defenses. "I speak truth which Valeborn shields you from." His voice softened to seemingly genuine concern. "When the portrait is complete, so too will be his interest. I would spare you the inevitable disappointment." Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Lord Morceran's capacity for truth has always been subordinate to his appetite for manipulation." Madame Thane stood in the doorway, her rigid posture communicating clear disapproval. His Grace would be most displeased to learn of this unsanctioned visit. Morceran recovered quickly, offering a bow of exaggerated deference. Ah, the faithful guardian. Still protecting Soren from himself, I see. I protect this household from those who would disturb its peace, she replied coldly, including those who abuse past acquaintance to gain entry where they are not welcome. His smile remained, though his eyes hardened. Such devotion. One wonders what inspires such loyalty. He turned back to Marianne with a final pointed look. Consider my words, Miss Solvine. Some portraits reveal truths the subject would prefer remained hidden. After he departed, Madame Thane approached, her expression softening marginally. You would be wise to disregard Lord Morceran's insinuations. He nurses ancient grievances like precious wine, growing more potent with time, yet increasingly bitter. You've served the Duke long? Marianne asked, unable to entirely dismiss the seeds of doubt Morceran had planted. Since before he inherited the title, she confirmed. I knew him as a boy, watched him become a man, witnessed his marriage and its difficulties. She hesitated, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. The Duke is a complicated man, shaped by losses few could comprehend, but he is not the villain Morceran portrays. And the Duchess? Was she truly unhappy? Madame Thane's gaze grew distant. Elaine came to this house expecting a fairy tale, and found instead a man wounded beyond her understanding. Their tragedy was not of cruelty but of timing, two souls meeting when neither possessed what the other required. She refocused on Marianne with sudden intensity. But you, Miss Solvine, you see him differently. Your portrait reveals as much. Before Marianne could question this observation, Madame Thane continued, His Grace returns tomorrow. Perhaps you might consider what completion of this portrait truly signifies, for both of you. That evening, Marianne stood before the canvas in solitude, studying what she had created. The formal trappings of nobility remained, the perfect posture, the dignified bearing, but beneath these, she had captured something more essential, a man of profound depth, whose guardedness masked not coldness, but an intense capacity for feeling. She realized, with sudden clarity that stole her breath, that she had painted not merely the Duke of Valeborn, but Soren as she had come to know him. Worse still, she had painted him as she had come to love him. The revelation settled over her like evening mist, inescapable and transforming. She had committed the unforgivable folly of falling in love with her subject, crossing boundaries of both profession and station. When the portrait was complete, their association would naturally conclude. He would return to his world of privilege, she to her modest existence. Unless what existed between them was more than artifice, unless what she captured on canvas reflected something real and mutual. Sleepless in her chamber that night, Marianne made a decision. The portrait would reveal truth, not merely of appearance, but of essence. And in that revelation, perhaps they both might find clarity about what truly existed between artist and subject, woman and man. The Duke returned the following afternoon, earlier than expected. Marianne, absorbed in her work, did not notice his arrival until his reflection appeared in the window beside her, a tall shadow framed by afternoon light. You've continued in my absence, he observed, his voice carrying a note of approval that warmed her despite her resolution to maintain professional distance. As you requested, Your Grace. She turned to face him, struck anew by the difference between the man who stood before her and the cold aristocrat she had first imagined. The journey had left subtle marks of fatigue around his eyes, a humanity the formal miniature had never captured. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the canvas. Marianne stepped aside, her heart accelerating as he studied her progress. The portrait was now approaching completion, the formal posture and attire of nobility present, but secondary to the character she had rendered. In place of remote dignity, she had captured alert intelligence, controlled passion, and a certain melancholy that spoke of depth rather than coldness. His silence stretched until it became unbearable. Have I displeased you? She finally asked. On the contrary. He turned to her, expression unguarded in a way she had rarely witnessed. You have seen what few have troubled themselves to observe. I merely painted what was before me. No, he countered gently. You painted what lies beneath. The question is how you managed to perceive it. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken implications. Marianne gathered her courage. Your friend Lord Morceran visited during your absence. His posture stiffened immediately. Morceran is no friend of mine. What did he want? Ostensibly to view the portrait's progress. She hesitated, then continued with deliberate care. He spoke of your past, of the late Duchess. A shadow crossed Soren's features. I see. And did his tales paint me the villain of that unfortunate chapter? He implied your nature made genuine connection impossible, she admitted, that the Duchess sought elsewhere what you could not provide. And you? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. What did you make of these revelations? Marianne met his gaze steadily. I wondered why a man would travel so far to poison another's reputation, unless that reputation mattered deeply to him. Unexpected amusement flickered in Soren's eyes. Astute observation. Morseren has harbored resentment since our university days, when his affections for Elaine went unrequited in favor of mine. He loved your wife? Before she was my wife, yes, perhaps even after. It fueled a rivalry that I, in my youthful arrogance, scarcely acknowledged. His expression darkened. When our marriage faltered, he was quick to offer Elaine the emotional refuge I had failed to provide. The admission hung in the air, painful in its honesty. Did they? She couldn't complete the question. No, he replied firmly. Elaine maintained her honor, if not her happiness. The scandal Morseren hints at existed only in gossip, not reality. He turned toward the window, his profile stark against the light. My failure was not infidelity but inadequacy. I could not be what she needed. Marianne approached cautiously, drawn by the rare vulnerability in his posture. And what was that? Demonstrative, open-hearted, capable of— He hesitated, searching for the word. Surrender. Something in his voice made her breath catch. Those are not qualities often valued in men of your station. Perhaps that explains their scarcity, he replied with unexpected bitterness. We are trained from boyhood to view feeling as weakness, vulnerability as failure. He turned back to her, his gaze intent. Until someone shows us otherwise. The implication was unmistakable. Marianne felt heat rise to her cheeks, even as professional caution urged retreat from this dangerous territory. Your portrait nears completion, she said, seeking safer ground. Another week, perhaps less. He accepted the change in subject with a slight nod. And then our professional association concludes. Yes, she agreed, the word tasting of finality and regret. Unless, he began, then stopped himself, seeming to reconsider. Unless, she prompted, her heart suddenly thundering in her chest. His expression shifted to formal resolve. I've been remiss in my social obligations. Lady Harwick's ball takes place tomorrow evening. As a patron of the arts, she would be delighted to make your acquaintance. The invitation, so unexpected, so fraught with implications, momentarily rendered Marianne speechless. To appear in society as his guest would provoke speculation no denial could quell. I have no suitable attire for such an occasion, she managed finally. That can be remedied, he countered, if you are willing. The offer stood between them, not merely an invitation to a ball, but a step beyond the sanctuary of the gallery into the scrutiny of society. A declaration of sorts, though neither yet dared name what was being declared. People will talk, she said softly. People always talk, he replied. The question is whether we grant their words power over us. Marianne thought of her solitary existence before this commission, respectable but hollow, filled with portraits of strangers who remained strangers even after she captured their likeness. She thought of Morseren's warnings and Madame Thane's cryptic counsel. Most of all, she thought of the man before her, who had gradually revealed himself not in formal sittings, but in quiet moments of unguarded honesty. Yes, she said finally, I would be honored to attend. Relief and something warmer transformed his features. I shall make the arrangements. Madame Thane will assist with any preparations you require. As he turned to leave, he paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before reaching a decision. From his pocket, he withdrew a small object and placed it on the table beside her easel. I found this in London, he said quietly. It reminded me of something essential. After he departed, Marianne examined his gift, a small paintbrush of exceptional quality, its handle inlaid with amber that caught the light like captured flame. Attached was a note in his precise handwriting, foreseeing what others miss. That evening, as promised, Madame Thane arrived with a dressmaker and selection of fabrics. The housekeeper's expression remained professionally neutral, though her eyes held knowledge she did not voice. His Grace requests these be made available for your selection, she explained, as the dressmaker unfurled lengths of silk in jewel tones. The modiste will work through the night if necessary. Marianne touched a length of azure fabric, the exact shade she had incorporated into the Duke's portrait. This one, she said softly. This is the color that speaks truth. Lady Harwick's ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, their light captured and multiplied, by gilt-framed mirrors and crystal chandeliers. The assembled nobility of 3 counties glittered and preened, their conversation a constant murmur beneath the strains of the orchestra. Marianne stood at the entrance, paralyzed by sudden doubt. The gown, a creation of azure silk that fell in elegant folds from an empire waist, made her look like a different woman entirely. The modiste had arranged her hair with pearl pins that caught the light, transforming her usual practical arrangement into something befitting a ballroom. "You appear lost in thought," came Soren's voice from beside her. He offered his arm, resplendent in formal evening attire, his expression betraying none of the uncertainty she felt. "I am considering the wisdom of this appearance," she admitted, placing her gloved hand on his sleeve. "I belong in studios, not ballrooms." "Yet you navigate both with equal grace," he countered. "Come, Lady Harwick awaits." They descended into the ballroom, and immediately Marianne felt the weight of curious stares. Whispers followed their progress across the polished floor, speculation rippling through the crowd like wind through summer wheat. Lady Harwick, a formidable dowager whose patronage could make or break artistic careers, received them with shrewd assessment. "Valeborn," she greeted, her gaze moving between them with undisguised interest. "Society had nearly forgotten your existence." "An oversight I am presently correcting," he replied, with practiced ease. "And this must be the artist responsible for your portrait, and perhaps your re-emergence." Her keen eyes fixed on Marianne. "Miss Solvine, is it not? I've heard promising reports of your work." "You are most kind, Lady Harwick," Marianne curtsied, attempting to project a confidence she did not feel. "Not kind, merely observant," the older woman corrected. "Talent deserves recognition, regardless of its source." She tapped her fan decisively. "You must show me the finished portrait when it's complete. I may have commissions to discuss." The exchange concluded with proper formalities, but Marianne caught the speculative gleam in Lady Harwick's eye as they moved away. "She knows," she whispered to Soren. "Knows what precisely?" he asked, guiding her toward the refreshment tables. "That this, my presence here, signifies something beyond professional association." His hand covered hers briefly, where it rested on his arm. Would that be so terrible an assumption? Before she could formulate a response, they were intercepted by a cluster of elegantly dressed matrons, each more determined than the last to extract information about the Duke's mysterious guest. Soren fielded their inquiries with diplomatic skill, introducing Marianne as a gifted artist whose work has recently captured my attention. The double meaning was not lost on his listeners, whose expressions ranged from scandalized to calculatingly approving. "An artist," repeated one lady, her tone suggesting she had said, "a curiosity." "How unconventional." "Miss Solvine's talent transcends convention," Soren replied, a note of steel beneath his courteous tone. "Her portrait reveals truths others have failed to capture." The statement, delivered with quiet authority, effectively silenced further commentary, at least temporarily. As they continued their circuit of the ballroom, however, Marianne became increasingly aware of the speculation their appearance had provoked. "They believe I am your mistress," she said softly, when they found a moment of relative privacy near a columned alcove. "They believe whatever feeds their appetite for scandal," he corrected. "Their opinions matter only if we grant them importance. Easy to dismiss when one is a duke," she pointed out. "Less so when one relies on commissions from the very society passing judgment." He frowned, genuine concern replacing his public mask. "Have I endangered your livelihood by bringing you here? That was never my intention." "I came willingly," she reminded him, "knowing the potential consequences." The orchestra began a new piece, the opening strains of a waltz. Around them, couples moved toward the center of the ballroom, arranging themselves for the dance. "Would you do me the honor?" Soren asked, extending his hand in formal invitation. The waltz, still considered somewhat scandalous despite its growing acceptance, would confirm every suspicion their appearance had provoked. To accept was to declare openly what had been developing privately within the gallery's sheltered confines. "People will certainly talk then," she said, not quite a refusal. "Let them," he replied simply. "I find I no longer care for the constraints of others' expectations." Marianne placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. As his arm encircled her waist with proper form but unmistakable intimacy, she felt a curious liberation, as if stepping into the portrait she had been creating, becoming part of the truth she had painted. They moved together with surprising harmony, their steps finding natural synchronization. The physical proximity, sanctioned by the dance yet charged with unspoken feeling, made conversation difficult, reducing their exchange to the more fundamental language of touch and gaze. "You dance beautifully," he observed, guiding her through a turn, "another talent you concealed." "My father believed artists should understand movement to capture it properly," she explained. "Though I never expected to waltz with a duke, and I never expected to find joy in being truly seen." The admission came quietly, meant for her ears alone. Yet here we are, defying expectations, our own as much as others. Their progress around the ballroom did not go unnoticed. Marianne caught glimpses of reactions, raised eyebrows, knowing smiles, disapproving frowns, but found unexpectedly that they mattered less than the man whose arms held her with such careful respect. As the waltz concluded, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the dance floor. Lord Morcerran watched them with thinly veiled displeasure, his amber eyes calculating beneath a veneer of social pleasantry. "It seems your friend disapproves," Marianne noted as Sorin led her from the floor. "Morcerran's approval is neither sought nor valued," he replied, though his expression tightened. "Unfortunately, his presence is an inevitability at gatherings such as this. He watches as if he owns a claim to your actions. He believes he does, the claim of shared history and privileged knowledge." Sorin's voice lowered. "He was the one who informed me of Elaine's unhappiness, presenting himself as concerned friend, while feeding her similar tales about my indifference. He manipulated you both," Marianne realized, a fact I recognized too late to salvage what might have been saved. His expression darkened with remembered pain. Elaine's death shortly thereafter left no opportunity for reconciliation, or for Morcerran to achieve whatever advantage he sought in our estrangement. Before Marianne could respond, Morcerran himself approached, his calculated smile failing to warm his predatory gaze. "Vailborn," he greeted, offering a bow of exaggerated deference. "How unexpected to see you embracing society again, and with such distinctive company." His gaze slid to Marianne, assessing her transformed appearance with undisguised interest. "Miss Solvine, the ballroom suits you nearly as well as the studio." "Lord Morcerran," she acknowledged coolly, "you seem surprised to find art and society compatible." "Not surprised, merely entertained by the spectacle." His smile sharpened. "One wonders how long the ton's fascination with novelty will endure before remembering its commitment to propriety." The implied threat hung in the air between them, clear in its intent if not its specifics. Sorin's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, though his expression remained controlled. "Propriety," he repeated, the word edged with disdain. "An interesting concept from one who has made a career of manipulating its appearance while violating its substance." Morcerran's smile never faltered, though his eyes hardened. "We each play the game according to our talents, old friend. Some with power, others with persuasion. And some choose not to play at all," Marianne interjected, unwilling to remain a silent pawn in their exchange. Morcerran turned to her with exaggerated interest. "Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, my dear Miss Solvine. Everyone plays. Some merely remain unaware of the board upon which they move." He glanced pointedly around the ballroom. "Tonight, for instance, you've been advanced like a queen, impressive but ultimately sacrificial when the true strategy demands it." The insult, veiled in chess metaphor, caused Sorin to step forward. "You forget yourself, Morcerran." "Do I?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Or do I simply recognize a familiar pattern? Elaine also believed herself exempt from consequence, until reality proved otherwise." At the mention of his late wife, something dangerous flickered in Sorin's eyes. "Do not speak her name again," he warned quietly. "Not here, not ever." Sensing the tension escalating beyond social boundaries, Marianne placed a restraining hand on Sorin's arm. "Perhaps some air would be welcome," she suggested, her tone light, though her eyes conveyed understanding of his anger. Morcerran watched this exchange with calculating attention. "Yes, by all means retreat. It's becoming something of a specialty for you, Vailborn." His gaze returned to Marianne. "Though I wonder if your artist understands the true nature of the gallery to which she's been assigned. Have you shown her the East Wing yet? Or does that remain sealed?" The question clearly held significance beyond Marianne's understanding, as evidenced by the subtle stiffening of Sorin's shoulders. "You speak of matters that do not concern you," he replied coldly. "Perhaps not," Morcerran conceded, with false graciousness. "But they may concern Miss Solvine, particularly if she is to become more than a temporary commission." The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Before Sorin could respond, Lady Harwick's formidable presence interrupted their exchange. "Vailborn," she called, approaching with determined stride, "I simply must borrow your artist for a moment. Lady Pevensey is absolutely desperate to discuss a potential portrait. The interruption, while socially awkward, provided necessary relief from the escalating tension. With a final warning glance at Morseron, Soren relinquished Marianne to Lady Harwick's guidance. "Thank you for the timely intervention," Marianne murmured as they moved away. The older woman sniffed dismissively. "Morseron delights in provoking scenes. I merely preserved the dignity of my ballroom." She patted Marianne's hand with surprising gentleness. "Besides, I recognize genuine attachment when I see it, rare enough in our circles to merit protection." Before Marianne could respond to this unexpected alliance, she found herself introduced to Lady Pevensey, a nervous woman whose interest in portraiture seemed genuine if technically uninformed. The conversation provided welcome respite, though Marianne remained acutely aware of Soren across the ballroom, now engaged in what appeared to be formal but tense conversation with several gentlemen. When they were reunited sometime later, his expression had settled into aristocratic impassivity, the ducal mask she had first encountered, now restored in public defense. "Forgive the separation," he said formally. "Lady Harwick is a force few dare oppose." "She was kind," Marianne replied, "more so than I expected." "Harriet Harwick recognizes quality independent of station," he observed, "a rare trait in our circles." His gaze surveyed the crowded ballroom with subtle wariness. "Would you find it terribly impolite if I suggested an early departure? I find my tolerance for society has diminished during my seclusion." Relief coursed through her. "I would welcome it." Their departure generated predictable murmurs, but Marianne found herself surprisingly unbothered by the speculation. In the sanctuary of his carriage, as gas lamps cast intermittent light through the windows, the tension that had gathered during the evening began to dissipate. "I must apologize for Morseron's behavior," Soren said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. His insinuations were unforgivable, yet they clearly held meaning beyond simple malice, she observed carefully. "His reference to the East Wing seemed particularly designed to provoke you." He stiffened slightly, his gaze turning to the passing shadows beyond the carriage window. "Morseron delights in exploiting vulnerability. The East Wing contains memories I have chosen to preserve privately." The careful phrasing confirmed her suspicion that something significant remained unshared. "Elaine's rooms?" His hesitation spoke volumes. "Yes," he acknowledged finally, "among other things." "You need not explain," she assured him, though curiosity and a certain apprehension stirred within her. What secrets might the sealed wing contain that Morseron believed would alter her perception of Soren? "Perhaps not," he agreed, his expression troubled in the half-light. "Yet I find myself increasingly unwilling to maintain walls between us, Marianne." The use of her given name, spoken with such quiet intimacy, sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Then don't," she replied simply. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The contact, even through gloves, carried significance that transcended the physical connection. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice low with promise, "tomorrow I will show you what lies behind locked doors. Not because Morseron's provocation demands response, but because you have earned the right to complete truth." The carriage slowed as they approached the manor, its windows dark save for the entrance lamps. Their journey had come full circle, back to the gallery where their connection had first formed, yet everything had shifted. The portrait neared completion, but something else had begun, something neither commission nor society could fully define. As he assisted her from the carriage, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Rest well, Marianne. Tomorrow asks courage of us both." In her chamber that night, unable to find sleep despite the late hour, Marianne stood at the window overlooking the gallery's east wing, a section of the manor she had never entered, its windows perpetually shuttered against daylight. What truth awaited there? What revelation might change everything between them? Whatever lay behind those locked doors, she realized with growing certainty, would determine whether the portrait she had painted, of a man capable of profound feeling beneath careful restraint, was truth or merely wishful creation. Morning arrived with gentle insistence, sunlight filtering through curtains to find Marianne already awake, her night having yielded little rest. She dressed with particular care, selecting her most presentable day gown, a modest creation of forest green that emphasized her eyes while maintaining professional dignity. Today would reveal whatever secrets lay within the East Wing, mysteries Morseron believed might shatter the fragile connection forming between herself and Soren. A light knock at her door revealed Madame Thane, her expression unusually solemn. "His Grace awaits you in the gallery." He asks that you bring your brushes. The request, mundane in its practicality, somehow intensified Marianne's apprehension. Soren stood before the portrait when she arrived, studying it with an intensity that suggested he sought answers within its painted surface. He turned at her approach, and Marianne was struck by the vulnerability evident in his usually guarded expression. "You came," he said simply, as if he had harbored doubt. "Of course," she replied, "though I admit to curiosity about why my brushes were requested for what I understood to be a revelation. Because what I show you today may alter how you perceive what you've created here." He gestured toward the portrait. "You've painted a truth I've hidden from the world. Now I must show you whether that truth is complete." He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, feeling the tension in his posture as he led her toward the eastern corridor, a passage she had never traversed, despite weeks within the manor. They stopped before a heavy oak door, its brass handle tarnished from disuse. "The east wing was Elaine's domain," he explained quietly. "After her death, I ordered it sealed. No servant enters save Madame Thane, who maintains it against decay, but otherwise preserves it as it was." From his pocket, he withdrew a key of intricate design. "What you see beyond this door may change your opinion of me, Marianne. If it does, I will accept your judgment without protest." The key turned with reluctant weight, the mechanism protesting its disturbance after long disuse. The door swung inward to reveal a corridor lined with covered paintings, their shapes suggesting portraits beneath the protective cloths. "This was Elaine's gallery," Soren explained, leading her forward. "She fancied herself an artist, though she lacked formal training." He paused before one draped frame larger than the others. With evident hesitation, he drew back the covering to reveal a portrait of himself, younger, his hair untouched by silver, his expression forbidding to the point of cruelty. "A rendering of me," he said quietly, "completed during our 3rd year of marriage." Marianne studied the painting with professional detachment that gradually yielded to disquiet. The technical execution was amateur, but the emotional intent undeniable. The artist had captured a man of cold authority, devoid of compassion or warmth. "She saw you very differently than I do," Marianne observed carefully. "She saw what I became in her presence," he replied, his voice hollow with regret. "A man retreating behind duty and reserve, rather than confronting a union that brought neither joy." He moved along the corridor, revealing more paintings, landscapes of increasing desolation, still lifes of wilting flowers, and finally, most disturbing, a self-portrait of Elaine herself. The woman depicted was beautiful in a conventional way, with golden hair and delicate features, but her eyes held a desperation that transcended the technical limitations of the work. "She was unhappy," Marianne said softly, the evidence undeniable. "Profoundly," Soren confirmed, though I recognized it too late to offer remedy. They continued deeper into the wing, passing rooms preserved as if awaiting an occupant long absent, a morning room with embroidery abandoned mid-stitch, a writing desk with pen still resting in its stand. "These are not the secrets Morceran implied," Marianne noted, growing confused by the tour of what appeared to be simply preserved grief. "No," Soren agreed. "Those lie ahead." At the corridor's end stood another door, this one secured with a more modern lock. Soren hesitated before it, his expression conflicted. "What lies beyond this threshold is the reason I've lived in seclusion since Elaine's death," he said quietly. "It is why I initially refused your portrait, why Morceran believes he holds power over me, and why the servants whisper when they believe I cannot hear." With evident resolve, he unlocked the door and stepped aside to allow her entry. Marianne crossed the threshold into what appeared to be a spacious studio, its walls lined with canvases of extraordinary quality, vibrant landscapes, sensitive portraits, and meticulous still lifes executed with masterful technique. "These are remarkable," she said, moving deeper into the room, drawn by their undeniable excellence. "Who created these?" "I did," Soren replied simply, closing the door behind them. Marianne turned to him in astonishment. "You?" "Yes." He moved to stand beside an unfinished canvas depicting the manor's western gardens. "This is my sanctuary, my secret." Understanding dawned slowly as she examined painting after painting, each revealing technical skill and emotional depth far beyond amateur enthusiasm. "You're an artist," she breathed, the revelation transforming her perception entirely. "A genuine, gifted artist. An inappropriate passion for the Duke of Valeborn," he said with soft bitterness. "Also my father impressed upon me from childhood. The title demanded dignity, restraint, adherence to suitable pursuits. Hunting, estate management, proper socialization, not the feminine indulgence of artistic expression. Marianne continued her inspection, increasingly awed by the caliber of work surrounding them. "These should be exhibited," she stated firmly. "They're extraordinary. They are shameful," he corrected, though without conviction. "A duke does not labor with his hands. He does not reveal emotion through mere paint and canvas. He does not lower himself to the status of tradesman." The word hung between them, highlighting the very disparity of their positions that had remained largely unacknowledged in the intimacy of the gallery. "Elaine discovered this room by accident," Soren continued, his voice distant with remembrance. "She had been raised to value station above all else, to believe in the natural order that placed nobility apart and above common pursuits. My artistic endeavors disgusted her. She threatened exposure, social ruin. So you locked away your passion to preserve your marriage?" Marianne concluded, piecing together the tragedy. "I locked away myself," he corrected. "I became the cold aristocrat she expected, abandoning not just art, but the vulnerability it represented." His gaze traveled the room with undisguised longing. "We both became prisoners of expectation. She unable to find joy in a husband who conformed to nobility's constraints, I unable to express the depth she craved while denying my true nature." Marianne approached him slowly, understanding now the full weight of what he had revealed. "And after her death, why remain imprisoned once your jailer was gone?" "Guilt," he admitted simply. "She died believing I had never truly seen her, never truly loved her. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I am incapable of the openness love demands." "I disagree," Marianne said softly, gesturing toward the paintings surrounding them. "These works reveal profound capacity for feeling, for seeing beauty in ordinary moments. They are not the creations of a man incapable of love." Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes, hope warring with habitual restraint. "Morseron knows of this room. He discovered my secret during a visit shortly after Elaine's death. He has held it over me since. The threat that society would learn the Duke of Valeborn debases himself with a commoner's pursuit." "And this is the revelation he believed would drive me away?" Marianne asked, incredulous. "That you possess extraordinary talent and sensitivity. That I am false," Soren corrected. "That the aristocratic dignity I present to the world masks a nature society would deem inappropriate to my station." He gestured toward the portrait she had been creating. "That the man you've painted may be a fiction of your own creation, rather than truth." Understanding dawned fully then, his reluctance regarding the portrait, his nocturnal visits to observe her work, his gradual shift from remote subject to engaged participant. He had been seeking confirmation of his own existence, validation that what she perceived in him was genuine, rather than imagined. "Soren," she said gently, using his given name without hesitation, "what I painted was never the Duke. It was always the man, complex, restrained yet feeling deeply capable of profound connection when permitted to exist authentically." She moved to a nearby easel where a half-finished portrait rested, a woman with auburn hair rendered with delicate attention, her features hauntingly familiar. "This is me," she realized with shock, recognizing her own likeness captured in moments she had been unaware of observation. "Begun after our first week," he admitted quietly. "I found I could not stop seeing you, even when you were absent. Your presence, your genuine perception, awakened something I believed long dead." The revelation hung between them, profound in its implications. Marianne studied her likeness on the canvas, rendered with such care, such attention to detail, that it could only be the product of genuine feeling. He had captured her not in posed formality, but in moments of unconscious authenticity, bent over her palette, contemplating the portrait, speaking to an empty room as if it might respond. "You've been painting me while I painted you," she said softly, a smile touching her lips at the unexpected symmetry. "An inexcusable liberty," he acknowledged, though his expression held no true remorse. "I found myself compelled by the woman who spoke to canvas as if it contained a soul, who saw beyond title to the person beneath." Marianne stepped closer to him, propriety surrendering to the truth this room had revealed. "Why reveal this to me now? Surely Morseron's provocations aren't sufficient reason to expose a secret so carefully guarded." "Because completion of your portrait approaches," he answered simply, "and with it, the natural conclusion of our association, unless there exists reason for continuation." The implication stilled her breath. "What reason would that be, Soren?" He moved toward her with careful deliberation, stopping when mere inches separated them. I find myself unable to contemplate returning to solitude after experiencing the illumination of being truly seen, of being known, not as duke or patron, but as myself, the self you somehow recognized before I revealed it. His hand rose, hovering near her face without quite touching, as if still bound by invisible constraints. I cannot offer conventional courtship. Society would never sanction. I care nothing for society's sanction, she interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence of her declaration. You should, he countered gently. Your reputation, your livelihood, are meaningless if purchased through denial of truth. She caught his hesitant hand, pressing it against her cheek in defiance of propriety. And the truth, Soren, is that I have fallen in love not with the Duke of Valeborn, but with the man who visits portraits after dark, who leaves amber roses as wordless messages, who sees beauty where others perceive only obligation. The confession, once voiced, seemed to vibrate in the air between them, irrevocable, transforming what had been unspoken into undeniable reality. Marianne, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. I have no right to ask. Then don't ask, she suggested, emboldened by the vulnerability in his gaze. Simply accept what is freely offered. For a moment he remained motionless, a lifetime of restraint warring with new-found courage. Then, with deliberate intent, he closed the remaining distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle reverence that quickly deepened to something more profound, a kiss that spoke of recognition, of homecoming after long exile. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, his breath uneven. I have loved you, he confessed, since you first challenged my perception of myself, since you refused to paint merely what was expected, and instead revealed what might be possible. Then we are equal in revelation, she replied, her hands resting against his chest, feeling the accelerated rhythm of his heart beneath formal attire. For I discovered my own courage through capturing yours. Reality intruded gradually, as it must. The sealed wing, the hidden paintings, the portrait nearing completion in the gallery, all existed within a world that would judge their connection by standards neither had chosen nor endorsed. What happens now? She asked, reluctantly stepping back to restore propriety's semblance, if not its substance. Soren's expression shifted, determination replacing vulnerability. Now I reclaim what fear and convention have stolen. He gestured around the studio. These works, my true self, have remained hidden too long. You would reveal them publicly? Marianne asked, understanding the magnitude of such a decision. I would reveal truth, he clarified, beginning with completing your portrait, not as client and artist, but as collaborators. He took her hand, his touch conveying certainty where words faltered. I would have your guidance, Marianne, in art and in the life that follows. The implication, so far beyond conventional boundaries, momentarily overwhelmed her. Society will never accept such an arrangement. Society, he replied with newfound confidence, has dictated terms long enough. Let it adapt to truth, rather than continuing to worship comfortable falsehood. They left the East Wing together, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, propriety already yielding to the greater intimacy of shared understanding. In the main gallery, her portrait of him awaited, nearly complete yet still lacking the final essence that would transform likeness to revelation. I believe, Soren said, studying the canvas with fresh perspective, that I am finally prepared to be seen as I truly am. Then let us complete your portrait, Marianne replied, taking up her brush with renewed purpose, and begin the work of living without concealment. The days that followed established a new rhythm, mornings spent in the gallery completing his official portrait, afternoons in the East Wing where they painted side by side, her technique flourishing under his guidance, while his emotional expression deepened through her influence. Barriers of station dissolved in the sanctuary of shared passion, replaced by the equality of genuine partnership. Madame Thane observed their transformation with quiet approval, her formal manner softening as she witnessed her long-suffering employer emerge from isolation into authentic existence. The house remembers light, she commented one evening, finding them in the gallery reviewing completed works. As does its master. Inevitable rumors circulated through county society, fueled by their appearance at Lady Harwick's ball and subsequent absence from other social functions. Morcerran, recognizing the shift in Soren's demeanor, increased his veiled threats of exposure, only to discover his once potent weapon rendered harmless by Soren's decision to reclaim his artistic identity without shame or apology. Your promised scandal rather loses its sting, Soren informed him during an uninvited appearance at the manor, when I no longer fear its revelation. Morseren's calculation faltered visibly. You would risk your standing, your reputation? For what? The temporary diversion of an artist's company? Not temporary, Soren corrected calmly. And not diversion. Transformation. He gestured to where Marianne worked nearby, deliberately within earshot. Miss Solvine has agreed to become my wife. The announcement, the first public declaration of their intention, brought colour to Marianne's cheeks, even as triumph filled her heart. They had discussed their future extensively in private, weighing consequences against conviction, ultimately choosing truth over convenient pretense. You cannot be serious, Morseren sputtered, genuine shock replacing calculation. A duke cannot marry a what precisely? Soren interrupted, his tone dangerously soft. An artist. I find the symmetry rather perfect, considering my own pursuits. A woman of modest birth? Such concerns pale when weighed against genuine connection. Society will never accept such a match, Morseren warned, though his conviction seemed to waver before Soren's unwavering resolve. Perhaps not, Soren agreed with surprising serenity, in which case society loses our participation, a sacrifice I find increasingly acceptable. The confrontation concluded with Morseren's departure, his power over Soren conclusively broken by the very revelation he had long threatened. In his wake, a curious lightness permeated the gallery, as if the final shadow had lifted from Soren's existence. Did you mean it? Marianne asked when they were alone. About marriage? He crossed to where she stood, brush still in hand, and took both her paint-stained hands in his. I have never meant anything more sincerely, he replied. If you will have me, not as duke or patron, but as partner in all things. Yes, she answered simply, completion of his portrait momentarily forgotten in the greater completion of their journey toward each other. Yes, I will have you, artist, duke, and man, in equal measure and without reservation. The exhibition caused precisely the scandal Morseren had predicted, though not for the reasons he had anticipated. Society's disapproval focused less on the revelation of the Duke of Valeborn's artistic pursuits and more on his decision to display them publicly alongside works by his fiancée, a woman of talent, but decidedly common birth. The announcement of their engagement, formally published in the London papers the week before the exhibition's opening, had already set tongues wagging throughout the peerage. Lady Harwick's patronage proved instrumental in securing the prestigious Royal Academy gallery space, a favour offered, as she explained with characteristic directness, because genuine talent deserves recognition, regardless of its source or the discomfort it causes the small-minded. The night of the opening, Marianne stood before the centrepiece of their joint exhibition, her completed portrait of Soren. In the final version, she had captured not merely the aristocratic dignity of his position, but the authentic humanity beneath, the artist's sensitivity in his hands, the quiet intelligence in his gaze, the capacity for profound feeling evident in the subtle warmth of his expression. Most telling was the background, where she had incorporated elements of his hidden studio, brushes and canvas visible behind him, previously unthinkable evidence of his true nature, now proudly displayed. You've made me more than I am, Soren observed, appearing at her side in formal evening attire that contrasted with the comfortable painting clothes he now wore when they worked together in the East Wing, no longer sealed, but transformed into a shared studio. I've painted what you've become, she corrected gently, the man brave enough to live authentically despite consequence. He took her hand, propriety now secondary to the deeper connection they had forged. His thumb traced the modest engagement ring she wore, a band of gold set with amber, rather than the ostentatious diamond his position might have dictated. The consequences have been less severe than anticipated, he noted, surveying the crowded gallery where society's curiosity had overcome initial disapproval. Not all peers had boycotted the exhibition, as some had threatened. Indeed, several had expressed cautious admiration for both the work and the courage its display represented. Though not without cost, Marianne reminded him, several prominent families had withdrawn patronage upon learning of their engagement, and whispers still followed them through certain circles. Yet these losses seemed increasingly insignificant compared to what had been gained. A price willingly paid, he assured her, his smile containing none of the reserve that had characterized their early interactions. Freedom rarely comes without sacrifice. The freedom they had claimed extended beyond society's expectations. The East Wing, once sealed in grief and secrecy, now hummed with creative energy as their shared studio. Marianne had moved permanently to the manor following their engagement announcement, occupying chambers adjacent to his, a scandal in itself, though mitigated by Madame Thane's careful chaperoning and the approaching date of their wedding. More revolutionary was Soren's decision to establish an art school on the estate, opening a portion of the manor to students of talent, regardless of background or means. The first class would begin after their wedding tour, with Marianne and Soren sharing teaching responsibilities, the Duke of Valeborn instructing aspiring artists alongside his commoner wife, convention thoroughly upended in favor of authentic purpose. "Your father would be appalled," Marianne teased gently as they circulated through the exhibition, acknowledging guests with the curious blend of formal courtesy and genuine warmth they had developed together. "Undoubtedly," Soren agreed with surprising lightness, though perhaps in time he might have recognized that duty fulfilled without joy serves neither the individual nor the legacy he sought to protect. They paused before one of his paintings, the portrait of Marianne he had begun in secret observation and completed with her knowing participation. In it, she stood before an easel, brush in hand, her expression intent yet joyful, captured in the act of creation that defined her essence. "You see me as I wish to be," she observed, studying his rendering of her with critical appreciation. "I see you as you are," he corrected. "The woman who taught me that true nobility lies in authenticity rather than artificial constraint." His voice lowered to ensure privacy despite the crowded gallery. "The woman who loved the artist before she could bring herself to tolerate the Duke." Their quiet laughter drew curious glances. The once reclusive Duke of Valeborn displaying genuine happiness remained a novelty worth observing, yet increasingly, such scrutiny carried less weight. They had created their own sanctuary within society's boundaries, neither fully conforming nor completely withdrawing, but establishing terms of engagement that preserved integrity rather than sacrificing it for acceptance. Near the exhibition's conclusion, Lady Harwick approached, her shrewd assessment taking in both their evident contentment and the gallery's successful attendance. "Well, Valeborn," she declared without preamble, "it appears your scandal has proven more fascinating than destructive. 3 of your landscapes have sold already, and inquiries about commissions for both you and your future Duchess number in the dozens." "Art's appreciation transcends its creator's circumstances," Soren observed, though pleasure at the recognition was evident in his expression. "Indeed," Lady Harwick agreed, "though I suspect many purchase out of curiosity rather than discernment. No matter, exposure to quality eventually educates even the most shallow perception." She tapped her fan decisively against her palm. "The wedding is next month?" "The 23rd, Marianne confirmed. "A small ceremony at the Manor Chapel." "To which I expect an invitation," the formidable dowager stated, rather than requested. "Someone must represent society's sensible faction among the inevitable gawkers." After her departure, they shared another private smile at her characteristic bluntness, a quality they had come to appreciate in a world where artifice too often masqueraded as propriety. As guests gradually departed, Soren guided Marianne toward the gallery's rear entrance, where their carriage waited. The night air carried the promise of approaching autumn, crisp yet gentle against heated skin. "Are you content with your decision?" she asked quietly as they settled into the carriage's privacy. "The altered course of your life?" In answer, he drew her into an embrace that would have scandalized the departing guests had they witnessed it, his lips finding hers with the familiar passion that now flowed freely between them behind closed doors. When they parted, his expression held the serene certainty that had gradually replaced aristocratic reserve. "I am not altered," he corrected gently. "I am restored." The man I was meant to be before fear and expectation buried him beneath the Duke's mantle. His hand caressed her cheek with artist's appreciation for the play of moonlight on beloved features. "You did not change me, Marianne. You simply refused to accept the incomplete portrait society had painted." As the carriage carried them home to the manor, now truly home for them both, Marianne leaned against his shoulder, propriety surrendering to comfort, as it increasingly did in their private moments. The exhibition would continue for 3 weeks, their art displayed together as their lives would soon be joined, different in technique and origin, but harmonious in the truth they expressed. The portrait that had initiated their journey hung at the gallery's center, a testament to what becomes possible when one soul truly sees another. The Duke of Valeborn, as captured by the artist who would become his Duchess, gazed out at the world, not with aristocratic detachment, but with the authentic presence of a man fully inhabited, artist and nobleman, ruler and creator, station and spirit reconciled at last in the alchemy of genuine love. And in that reconciliation lay the exhibition's true masterpiece, not painted on canvas, but lived in the courage of two hearts refusing society's narrow frame, creating instead a new composition where authenticity outvalued artifice, and love transcended the boundaries of both birth and expectation. The truest nobility lies not in titles or stations, but in the courage to live authentically despite society's judgment. When we hide our genuine selves behind masks of expectation, we imprison not only our own spirit, but also our capacity to form deep connections with others. It is only when we dare to be seen, vulnerabilities, passions and all, that we create space for genuine love to flourish. The portrait we present to the world often conceals more than it reveals, painted with careful strokes of conformity rather than the bold colors of truth. Yet there is no greater art than removing these layers of pretense to stand revealed in our authentic nature, whatever the cost to convention. In doing so, we discover that the limitations we feared were largely of our own creation, and that true freedom begins the moment we choose integrity over acceptance. Love, in its most transformative form, does not require us to become someone else, but rather invites us to finally become ourselves. It sees beyond the canvas of our public persona to the masterpiece of our genuine heart, waiting to be unveiled. In this revelation lies not scandal but salvation, the profound relief of being truly known and loved, not despite our truth, but because of it. Did this tale of hidden passions and courageous revelations stir something in your own heart? Perhaps you too have felt the weight of expectations that prevent your true self from emerging into the light. If Marianne and Soren's journey resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the delicate art of becoming authentically ourselves despite society's narrow frames. Each week, we unveil new tales of courage, vulnerability, and the transformative power of being truly seen. Share in the comments below what mask you've been afraid to remove in your own life. What passion or truth remains hidden in your own East Wing, waiting for the courage of revelation? Your story matters, and in sharing it, you might inspire others to pick up their own brush and paint a life of authentic beauty. Remember, the most exquisite portrait is not the one that flatters, but the one that reveals the truth with compassion and courage. Subscribe now and join our gallery of souls brave enough to step beyond the frame of expectation into the masterpiece of genuine living.